Aloan had spent her whole life learning how to be unseen, and the wolves were the only creatures who had never once let her manage it. She was raking the soiled straw from the third pen when the evening bell rang across Duncarrow. And she did not look up, because looking up was a habit that had gotten girls like her noticed, and being noticed had never brought her anything good. The kennels smelled of wet fur and pine tar, and the iron tang of the meat barrels, and she loved that smell, the way other people loved perfume. It was the smell of the only place in the fortress where nothing was ever expected of her but kindness. The old grey female they called Mist pressed her flank against the bars as Aloan passed, and Aloan let her fingers trail through the coarse rough without thinking, the way you might touch a doorframe in your own home. Then Mist went still. Every wolf in the long stone row went still at the same moment, 40 animals falling silent between one breath and the next, and the quiet that dropped over the kennels was so total that Aloan heard her own pulse in her ears. The torches guttered. Somewhere far off, up past the inner wall, a chain rattled once and snapped with a sound like a struck bell. A guardsman came running through the yard, his boots skidding, his face the color of ash. "It's loose," he shouted. To no one. To everyone. "The warden is loose. Get inside. Bar the doors." Aloan did not move. She could not have said why. Every sensible person in Duncarrow was already moving, and she could hear them, the scrape and slam of shutters, the high, thin scream of a scullery girl cut short by a closing door, the kennel boys scrambling up into the hayloft and hauling the ladder after them. The warden. She had never seen it, only heard it, the way everyone heard it. A sound that came down from the moon court on the worst nights and made the ordinary wolves cower, and made grown men touch the old signs against their throats. The great wolf. The king's wolf. The beast that was said to be older than the house it served, that had gone into the last 3 battles at the king's side, and come home from every one, that had killed 2 of its own handlers within the year, and knelt, they said, to nothing living and nothing dead. She heard it before she saw it, not a growl. Something worse, something like grief, with teeth in it, a low, broken sound rolling down the covered walk toward the kennels, and the torches leaned away from the doorway, as though the dark itself were being pushed ahead of it. And then it filled the door. Aloan had known it would be large. She had not known that large was a word that could stop working. The warden stood taller at the shoulder than she stood on her feet, its head lowered, its fur the deep gray of a storm that had not decided yet whether to break. There was old blood, dried black, in the fur of its chest. Its eyes, when they found her across the length of the kennel, were not the flat gold of the animals in the pens. They were pale, almost silver, and they were terribly, unbearably aware, and they were fixed on her and nothing else in the world. She should run. She knew she should run. Her body had made a different decision without asking her, which was to stand exactly still and to breathe as shallowly as possible and to think, with the strange clarity that comes to people at the edges of things, that its lashes were long and pale and that no one had ever told her a monster could have lashes. The warden crossed the kennel toward her. It did not hurry. 40 wolves pressed flat to the backs of their pens and whined like pups. Aloan's hands had gone numb around the rake. Behind her was only the windowless closet, where she slept among the spare tack and the drying herbs. Nowhere left to run, and the enormous animal walking toward her had slowed, and gentled, and dropped its head lower with every step, until it was not stalking her at all. It stopped an arm's length away. She could feel the heat coming off it. She could smell blood, and cold air, and something underneath both, something old, like the inside of a shut chapel. And then, in front of the 2 kennel boys frozen white-faced in the loft, in front of the guardsman who had come to the doorway with his spear and now could not seem to lift it, in front of the whole listening dark, the warden of Duncarrow lowered its great grey body to the straw at Aloan's feet, folded its legs beneath it, and laid its heavy head down across the toes of her worn leather boots, and it closed its eyes. The silence changed. It went from the silence of terror to the silence of something no one had a name for. The guardsman's spear clattered against the stone. Up in the loft, one of the boys made a small sound and pressed both hands over his own mouth. Elowen stood with a monster asleep across her feet and could not make her lungs work properly. Do something, she told herself. Do anything. But there was nothing in the whole store of her small, careful life that told a person what to do when the deadliest creature in the realm decided to use her boots for a pillow. Her voice came out of her before she could stop it, a cracked whisper, absurd in the enormous quiet. You have got the wrong girl, she told it. The warden did not stir. Its breathing had gone slow and deep, the breathing of an animal that had not truly rested in a long, long time, and there was something in the sound of it that made a terrible ache open up under Elowen's ribs, a tenderness she had no right to feel toward a thing that had killed men. That was how Halda found her. The old kennel mistress came in low and quiet through the side door. Her lamp shuddered to a slit, and she took in the whole scene in one long look. The sleeping warden, the frozen boys, the guardsman on his knees, and Elowen standing white and rigid in the middle of it. Halda's weathered face did something Elowen had never once seen it do. It went afraid. She crossed the straw without a sound. She put her dry old hand around Elowen's wrist and squeezed once, hard, a warning, and she leaned in until her lips nearly brushed Elowen's ear. Do not smile, Halda breathed. Do not touch it. Do not let a single soul in this yard see you are anything but as frightened as they are. Her grip tightened. Whatever it does, girl, you did not make it do it. Do you hear me? You did not make it do anything. Halda, Elowen whispered, what is happening to me? The old woman did not answer, because at that moment torchlight flooded the doorway and boots came down the covered walk in a hard, fast rhythm, and a man's voice, cold and used to being obeyed, cut clean across the kennel. Where is it? The voice said. Where is the warden? And then the owner of the voice stepped into the light and saw exactly where the warden was, and saw whose feet it slept upon, and went as silent and still as everything else in that long stone room. Hulda's hand tightened to the bone. Under her breath so low it was almost nothing, she said the words that would follow Elowen into every dream she had for weeks. Say nothing, the old woman breathed. The king has sent for you. They took her before dawn, which was its own kind of mercy, because it meant the courtyards were empty, and there was no one to see the kennel hand walking between two guards, with her chin down and her heart going like a trapped bird. She had not slept. How could she? They had eased the warden off her feet near midnight, a full watch of the king's own men, working with the slow, terrified care of people diffusing something that might go off, and the moment the great wolf's weight lifted, she had staggered back against the tack wall and slid down it and stayed there shaking. Until Halda wrapped a blanket around her shoulders and made her drink something bitter and warm. The warden had let them lead it away. That, she had heard one of the men whisper, was the strangest part of all. It had gone quiet as a lamb the instant it woke, quiet for the first time in half a year, and it had looked back at her once from the doorway before the dark swallowed it. Now the sky over Duncarrow was the color of a healing bruise, and Elowen was being walked up through the fortress she had never once been permitted to enter, and every step took her further from the only life she understood. I did not do anything, she said, for the third time to the guard on her left. He was young, he had not been in the kennel. She thought that might make him kinder, and she was wrong. He looked straight ahead and said nothing, and she understood that he had been told not to speak to her, and that frightened her more than shouting would have. People did not go silent around a person who was in no trouble. People went silent around a person who might be dangerous or doomed, and she did not know which of those she was supposed to be. They passed under an arch carved with the running wolf of House Vardane and into a waiting room that smelled of cold stone and beeswax, And there they left her, and the door shut, and she heard the bar drop on the other side. Barred in. She stood in the middle of the small room and pressed her hands flat against her thighs to stop them trembling, and tried to think, which was difficult, because her thoughts kept sliding back to the weight of that great head across her boots, and the awful gentleness of it. Wolves had always come to her. That was the secret. The small, strange secret that Helda had drilled into her from the day she was old enough to understand it. Every wolf in every pen gentled when Eloin walked the row. Sick ones ate for her that would eat for no one. Vicious ones, the ones marked for the pit, lay down and showed their throats. Once, when she was 9, a werewolf had broken its chain and put a handler in the infirmary, and it had been Eloin, all of 40 pounds of her, who walked out into the yard while grown men shouted at her to run. And it had been Eloin, the animal had followed back into its pen like a scolded pup. Hulda had hushed the kennel boys with a sharp word and a threat and a bribe of honey cakes. And afterward, she had held Eloin's face in her 2 hands and said, "You must never let them see it. Not the highborn, not the king's men. A girl, the beasts obey is a key, child. And keys get used, and used-up keys get thrown in the fire. Do you understand me? You are nothing. You must always, always be nothing." And Eloin had been nothing, very carefully, for 11 years. But you could hush a kennel boy with honey cakes. You could not hush the king's beta, and the 2 boys in the loft, and a guardsman, and the fact that the warden of Duncarrow had walked past 40 animals and a fortress full of trained killers to lie down and sleep on the feet of a girl who mucked out pens. The bar lifted. Eloin's heart climbed into her throat, but it was not the king. It was the man from the doorway, the one with the cold voice, and now that there was light to see him by, she took him in properly. A tall, spare man, perhaps 10 years older than she was, with a soldier's stillness and eyes that missed nothing. He wore the gray knot of a beta at his shoulder. He looked at her the way a man looks at a lock he cannot place. "My name is Osric," he said. "I serve the king." He paused. "You are the kennel girl, Eloin." That he knew her name at all was so wrong, so far outside the order of things, that she said, the first stupid thing that came into her head, "Am I to be punished, my lord?" Something moved across his face. There and gone, for what? For it. Sleeping on me. I did not ask it to. I would never. Her voice was climbing, and she could not stop it. I do not even know how I would ask it. I have never so much as seen it before tonight. I swear it on the moon. I swear it on anything you like. "I believe you," Osric said, and the trouble was that he said it slowly, thoughtfully, the way a man says a thing he has just found out is true and does not like. He studied her. "In half a year," he said at last, "that animal has knelt to no one, not to its handlers, not to the council, not to the king himself. He let that land. Tonight it walked the length of the West Range, past every soul in this hold, to sleep on you. And then it slept. Truly slept. Do you understand what I am telling you?" "No," Eloin whispered, and it was the most honest thing she had said in years. "Neither do I," said Osric, "but the king intends to find out." He stepped back and held the door, and the gray light of the corridor lay beyond it, like a road she did not want to walk. "Come. He is waiting." And Eloin. He waited until she met his eyes. "Whatever you saw in that kennel tonight, whatever you feel when you are near that beast, you will tell no one but him. If the wrong people in this fortress learn what you are, you will not live to see the moon rise twice." She did not ask what she was. She was terribly afraid. He did not know either. And even more afraid that somewhere underneath her ribs, in the place that had ached when the warden breathed, she did. The king's hall was not what she expected. She had imagined gold, banners, a throne, like a threat. Instead, Osric led her past all of that, through the public rooms and out again, down a covered stair, and across a bare-walled yard she had never known existed, to a set of iron doors, flanked by a dozen of the most frightened, brave men she had ever seen. They opened the doors. They did not follow her in. The moon court was a wide, round yard, open to the paling sky, walled in old stone twice the height of a man. And in the center of it, chained now, with links as thick as her wrist, to a ring set deep in the ground, was the warden. It was on its feet. It was not calm. Whatever peace it had found on her boots in the night had drained out of it, and what was left was the thing the fortress feared, a great gray shape pacing the limit of its chain, ears flat, a low, ceaseless sound coming out of it that raised every hair on Eloan's body. There was fresh blood at the corner of its mouth. One of the handlers, she would learn later, had gotten too close at dawn. And beside the ring, close enough that the warden's lunges brought its teeth within a hand's breadth of him, stood a man who did not flinch. She knew him at once, though she had never seen his face. You could not be raised in the shadow of a fortress and not know the shape of the man it belonged to. King Emrys of House Vardane was tall and broad through the shoulders in a way that spoke of the wolf beneath the skin. Dark-haired, dressed for the yard in plain leather and rolled sleeves. And there was blood on his forearm that she did not think was his. He had a hand half raised toward the raging beast, and his face, in profile, was set in an expression she recognized because she had worn it herself for as long as she could remember. It was the face of someone holding very still so that no one would see how much something hurt. "Bring her," he said, without turning. His voice was rougher by day than it had been in the dark of the kennel. "And then all of you get behind the wall." Osric put a hand between Eloan's shoulder blades and pressed her forward. One step, two, into the open yard, and then he was gone, and the iron doors boomed shut behind her, and she was alone with the king of the realm and a monster on a chain. The warden saw her. It stopped pacing between one stride and the next. The awful sound died in its throat. Its silver eyes fixed on her exactly as they had in the kennel, and the flattened ears came up, and Eloan felt it again. That impossible tenderness reaching across the yard and hooking into the place beneath her ribs and against every instinct of her small, careful life. She felt her own fear drain away and something else pour in to fill the space. Something that felt terrifyingly like recognition. "Come here," she heard herself say. "Not to the king, to the wolf." "Do not," the king said sharply, turning at last. "The chain does not reach the far wall. Keep to the—" And then he saw her face, and saw the warden's face, and stopped. Eloan walked to the great wolf across the open ground. She was aware, distantly, that this was madness, that the king himself had gone still with the particular stillness of a man watching a person step off a roof. The warden lowered its head as she came. When she reached it, she did the only thing she knew how to do, the thing she had done in the kennels 10,000 times, which was to put her hand flat against the broad plane of its skull and stroke down, once, along the coarse storm-gray fur, and murmur the nonsense that had no words, only warmth. The warden shuddered from nose to tail. And then, with a groan that sounded almost human, it folded its legs and lay down at her feet in the dust of the moon court, and put its head against her knee, and let out a long breath, and was still. For a moment, the only sound in the whole yard was that slow, deepening breathing. "Sweet mother of the moon," the king said quietly. Eloan looked up. She had forgotten to be afraid of him, which was itself a kind of danger, and she found him staring at her with an expression that had cracked wide open. The held-still face gone, and underneath it was something raw. Hope, she realized. The awful, unguarded hope of a man who had stopped letting himself have any. "You are the kennel girl," he said. "Eloan, your majesty." Her hand had not stopped moving through the warden's fur. "Eloan." He said it, as though he were weighing it. He took a slow step closer, and the warden did not stir, and she watched the king notice that too. Watched the meaning of it move across his face. "Do you know," he said, "how long it has been since it slept?" Osric said. "Half a year, your majesty." Osric was being kind. Emrys crouched down on his heels an arm's length away, careful, watching the wolf, watching her. It has not truly slept since the spring of last year. It cannot, and when it does not sleep, it goes mad, and when it goes mad, he stopped, his jaw worked. It is bound to me, he said instead. Do you understand what that means? It is bound to the crown, to the blood of my house. It is the reason the borders hold. It is the reason I am king, and not a corpse in a barrow, like my grandfather, and it is dying. Kennel girl? It has been dying for a year, in front of my eyes, and every healer, and every hedge witch, and every scholar in 3 realms has told me the same thing, that a warden that cannot rest, cannot live, and that when it dies. Again he stopped himself. When it dies, Eloin said softly, so does the king. The look he gave her then was very strange. So does everything, he said. The warden sighed against her knee, deep and content, a full year of exhaustion pouring out of it, and Eloin felt tears prick at her eyes, for reasons she could not have explained, and the king of the realm knelt in the dust and watched a nameless girl do in 1 morning what all his power had failed to do in a year. And neither of them said the thing both had begun to feel, which was that this was not an accident, and that nothing about their lives would be small or safe or unseen ever again. They did not let her go back to the kennels. By midday, she had been given a room, an actual room, small and plain and high in the servants' tier, but with a window and a door that latched from the inside, and a change of clean clothes, and more food than she was used to seeing in a week. She sat on the edge of the narrow bed and did not touch any of it. A room with a latch was not a kindness. Halda had taught her that too. A room with a latch was a place they could keep track of you. It was Halda who came, in the end, sent up under guard with a basket of the drying herbs from the kennel closet, which Eloin suspected was a fiction Osric had allowed so that the one person Eloin trusted could reach her. The old woman waited until the guard had shut the door, and then she sat down heavily in the room's single chair and looked at Eloin for a long time with wet, frightened eyes. I always knew, Halda said, that I would not get to keep you hidden forever. She said it the way you confess a thing you have carried a long way. I have watched that yard for 40 years, child. I have seen 100 beasts, and I have seen what they do around ordinary folk. And I have seen what they do around you, and I have spent years praying to a moon I am not sure hears me that no one else would ever put those 2 things side by side. Then you know what I am. Eloin's voice was very small. You have always known. Tell me, please. I have never in my life been able to ask anyone. Halda's hands twisted in her apron. Older than the House of Vardane. Older than the crown. My grandmother used it, and she had it from hers, and they used it in whispers even then. She glanced at the latched door as though the word might carry through it. A voice. That is what the old folk called someone like you. Not a witch, not a shifter, something rarer, and the pack elders guarded them close, because a voice is the one thing a wolf cannot refuse. Any wolf. Sick or savage or… She stopped. Her throat moved, or bound, she finished. Even a warden. The words settled over the little room like snowfall. There are supposed to be none left, Halda went on, quieter still. That is what the stories say. That the last of the true voices died out generations ago. That the line was ended. Something flickered in the old woman's face, something she seemed to decide, right then, not to say, and Eloin was too frightened to notice the shape of the thing being withheld. But you were left at the winter gate as a babe in a basket, lined with wolfskin. Girl, wolfskin, do you know what that cost? And the beasts have loved you from your first day among them. There is more to that night at the winter gate than I have ever told you, and I am not certain I have the courage to tell it even now. Eloin's mind was reeling, but underneath the fear a cold, practical dread was rising, the same dread she had felt when the young guard would not speak to her. Osric said if the wrong people learned what I am, I would not live to see the moon rise twice. She looked up. Why? Why would the king's own Beta warn a kennel girl? What use is a voice to the wrong people, Halda? The old woman's face closed like a shutter. Because a beast that cannot be refused, she said, is a weapon that cannot be defended against. And the warden is not the only wolf bound to the crown child. Every alpha in every great house is a wolf, in the end, and every one of them can be commanded. If the right voice stands close enough and willing, she gripped Eloin's cold hand in both of hers. There are men in this fortress who have wanted the king dead for 20 years and never found a blade that could reach him. You are a blade that can reach anyone. That is what you are worth to the wrong people. That is why you must be nothing. Still. Always, even now. Eloin looked down at her own hands. The chapped knuckles, the crescents of kennel dirt she could never quite scrub out from under her nails, and tried to fit the word Halda had given her into the shape of the person she knew herself to be. It would not go. A voice. A blade that could reach anyone. Those were words for someone with a name. Someone a mother had wanted enough to keep. Not for a thing left in a basket at a winter gate. Who had spent her girlhood making herself so small and so useful that no one would ever have cause to look at her twice, because she had understood very young that being wanted was not a thing that happened to her, and the safest thing of all was being neither. I do not feel like a weapon, she said. I feel like a girl who is very good at cleaning up after animals. Halda's mouth twitched, despite everything. The most dangerous ones always do, child. Then the humor went out of her, and she leaned close. Listen to me. Whatever they ask of you in the days to come, and they will ask, you keep the true shape of it behind your teeth. Let them think you are a girl who is fond of dogs. A useful girl, a nothing girl who happens to be lucky with beasts. Do not, ever, let one of them say the word, voice out loud, and see your face agree with it. And if the king already knows, the king, said Halda grimly, is the one man in this fortress whose wolf you cannot afford to save and cannot afford to let die, and I have not yet decided which of those will get you killed faster. She stood, her knees cracking, and gathered her empty basket. But that beast has a year of dying in it, and now it has had one night of rest on your feet, and a starving thing that has had one taste does not go back to starving quietly. You had best decide, and soon, what you are willing to be, because they have already decided what they need you to be. A knock came at the door. Both women froze. Then the door opened, without waiting for an answer, and it was Osric, and his face was grave. And behind the gravity was something Eloin was learning to read on the king's men, a carefully managed fear. The warden will not settle, he said. It has been an hour since she left the yard, and it is tearing itself against the chain. The king is asking for you. He hesitated, and then he said the thing that turned the cold dread in Eloin's stomach to ice. And Eloin, Counselor Sethric was in the gallery above the moon court this morning. He saw the beast lie down at your feet. Osric's jaw tightened. By nightfall, half the great houses will know there is a girl in Duncarrow that the warden obeys, which means we are already out of time. The king did not ask her, kings did not ask. But he came as close to it as she supposed a king ever came, which was to stand at the window of his study with his back to her and say the whole thing to the gray evening outside, as though it were easier that way. The warden sleeps when you are near it, Emrys said. Twice now, both times at your hand, after a year of dying by inches. I will not pretend to understand it, and I have stopped waiting for anyone to explain it. So here is what I am offering and requiring, because with you, the two are the same thing. He turned. In the low light, the shadows beneath his eyes were plain, and Eloin understood she was not the only one in this room who had not been sleeping. You will attend the warden each night. There is a chamber adjoining my own. The beast will be kept there, and you will keep it quiet. In return you have my protection, which in this fortress is worth more than gold, and lasts exactly as long as I do. As far as Duncarrow is concerned, You are a servant of my household, and nothing more. Is that understood? Eloan had spent the walk up, rehearsing how to be nothing, and so she surprised them both when she said, "What does it eat?" The king blinked. "What?" "The warden. What is it being fed, and how often, and by whom? And does anyone let it out to run, or has it been chained in a stone yard for half a year, like a criminal? Because I will tell you now, your majesty, that no creature on this earth sleeps well when it is bored and penned and never once allowed to stretch its legs. And if you have all been standing about asking hedge witches why it will not rest, while it lives chained to a ring in the dirt, then I think you have been asking the wrong question." She heard herself and stopped, appalled. "I mean," she added. "Yes, understood, your majesty." There was a silence. Osric by the door had developed a sudden interest in the ceiling. Then the corner of the king's mouth moved just slightly, the ghost of an expression that seemed to cost him something. "I see," he said, "that you are going to be a great deal of trouble." "I have handled worse tempers than yours in the pit, sire," Eloan said, and then wished very much that she had not, and the ghost of the expression became, for one unguarded instant, something that was almost a smile before he shut it away. "Then handle mine," he said. "And you may have your way with the beast, feed it what you like, walk it where you like, within the inner walls, at whatever hour keeps it content. I will give the order tonight." He paused, and something crossed his face that she could not name. "No one has spoken to me the way you do since I was a boy. I find I have missed it more than I knew. Do not let that comfort you. The people who spoke to me plainly are all dead." It should have frightened her. It did frighten her. But underneath the fear, there was a small, fierce gladness that she had won the warden its freedom to run, and she tucked that away where he could not see it, because she had learned long ago that a thing you let people see you wanting was a thing they could take away. "Understood, your majesty," she said, and this time she managed to leave it there. The adjoining chamber was warmer than any room she had ever been given, with thick rugs and a banked fire and a low, broad couch that she suspected had been dragged in and stripped of its fine cushions for exactly this purpose. They brought the warden up after dark, 6 men, and a great deal of quiet muttering, and the moment the beast saw her, it went still, and the men fled, and then it was only Eloan and the enormous grey wolf in the firelit dark. "There now," she murmured, the way she had murmured to 1,000 frightened animals, and she sat on the floor with her back against the couch, and the warden came and lowered itself beside her, and put its head in her lap with a groan that shook its whole frame. She stroked the coarse fur between its ears. She found the old scars there, ridged under the fur, a lifetime of them, and newer wounds too, the raw places where the chain had chafed it in the moon court, and something in her went hot and furious on its behalf. "They have not been kind to you," she told it softly. "No one has thought to be. Well, I am no one, so we are well matched, you and I." She told it about Mist, and about the kennel boy who was afraid of geese, and about nothing at all, and its breathing slowed, and went deep. She did not mean to sleep herself. But the fire was warm, and the great wolf's weight was warm, and she had not truly rested since the night this began, and somewhere in the low country between waking and sleeping her eyes drifted shut, and she opened them somewhere else. She stood in a forest of white birch, under a moon far too large and far too bright, and the ground was old snow, and the cold went straight through her as though her clothes were not there at all. It was utterly silent, the way the kennels had gone silent the night the warden came, a silence with weight to it. Between the pale trunks, far off, something long and gray moved, and stopped, and turned its head toward her, and she felt it see her, and nearer, half buried in the snow at the foot of the largest tree, there was a chain, a great chain of dull silver, thicker than the warden's, running off into the dark, toward something she could not see and did not, in that moment, want to. A voice came out of the trees. Not the warden's. a woman's thin and far away, and worn to almost nothing, saying a single word that Elowyn could not make out, but that struck her under the ribs like a stone dropped into a well. She woke with a cry, upright on the rug, her heart slamming. The fire burned to embers and the warden's silver eyes open and fixed on her face in the dark, and from the doorway to the king's chamber came the sound of a man who had been standing there for some time, and Emrys said, very quietly in a voice she had never heard him use, "You saw it too." She had expected the days after to be full of questions. Instead, they filled with something she had no practice at, which was routine. A shape settled over her nights. After the fortress quieted, she would go up to the warm adjoining chamber, and they would bring the warden, and she would sit with it and talk it down into sleep, and then, most nights, the king would come and sit in the chair, by the cold hearth of the connecting door, not speaking, only there. And she came to understand that he could not sleep unless the beast did, because whatever ran between the king and his warden ran both ways. When the warden could not rest, Emrys could not rest. When the great wolf lay quiet with its head in a kennel girl's lap, the man a room away finally closed his eyes. She had cured 2 patients at once, and only ever been introduced to one of them. He was not warm. She would not have called him warm. But the sharp brittleness she had felt from him that first morning in the moon court began, night by night, to wear away, the way a hard winter wears towards something that is not spring, but is at least no longer trying to kill you. He asked her once out of a long silence whether the beast preferred to sleep on her left side or her right, and she told him the left, and the next night the couch had been moved so that she could sit with her right hand free to work. Small things. She noticed them, the way you notice the first warm day without quite trusting it. The warden, for its part, had abandoned all its terror and become, in private, the largest and most shameless dog in the history of the world. It brought her things: a gnawed leather strap, a dead bird, once, laid proudly across her feet, which she had been obliged to admire, while Osric made a strangled sound in the corridor. It rolled onto its back, and presented its scarred belly to be scratched with the dignity of a fallen god. And Elowyn scratched it, and the king watched this from his chair one night, with an expression she could not read, and said, "Men have died attempting to touch that animal," and she said, "Then men should have offered to scratch its belly instead of chaining it in a yard." And Emrys had laughed. It was not much of a laugh. It was rough and short, and looked as though it startled him more than it startled her. But she had done that. She had reached inside the coldest man in the realm, and found something living, and the knowledge of it sat in her chest all night, like a coal she was afraid to breathe on. There were other nights he did not laugh at all. Nights he came to the chair by the cold hearth, grey-faced and silent, and simply sat. And she learned not to fill those silences, learned that a man could be as skittish of comfort as any beaten animal in her pens. One night he fell asleep in the chair, upright mid-sentence, the way a man falls who has held himself awake by will alone for longer than a body can bear, and Elowyn sat unmoving with the warden's head in her lap for 3 hours so as not to wake him, and counted it the finest thing she had done in her life. She had taken to humming, low, an old tune from the kennels that the animals liked. A rise and fall with no words that her own throat seemed to know without being taught. And a fortnight into the arrangement, she passed the king in a public corridor by daylight, both of them playing at being strangers, as they had agreed, and as he swept by her with his counsel at his heels, she heard it, under his breath, so quiet that only she could have caught it. The rise and fall, her tune. He did not so much as glance at her, and he did not stop, and he carried her song away down the corridor, as though it had always been his, and Elowyn had to press her back to the cold wall and remember how to breathe. But there was a shadow on all of it, and its name was Sethric. Osric warned her first. The counselor has asked 3 separate servants what duties keep the kennel girl in the royal tier at night, he told her, low and grim, in the herb-scented chamber one evening. He has asked whether you were born in the fortress. He has sent a man to the winter gate to ask the old porter what he remembers of a certain basket. His jaw was tight. He is a patient man and a clever one, and he has spent half his life wanting things he is not permitted to have. Be careful, Eloin. Be small. She tried. She was good at small. But the fortress had its own currents, and 10 days later the great house of Aldereth came to Duncaro to renew its oaths, and every soul of rank was required to stand in the great hall, while the old Lord Aldereth knelt before the king, and Eloin folded in among the household servants at the back where no one looked, made herself as invisible as long practice could make her. It was not enough. Lord Aldereth was an alpha, an old wolf under an old man's skin, and when he rose from his knee, his gaze drifted, without his willing it, without his knowing it, across the whole crowded hall, and came to rest on a plain girl at the very back, and his head turned, and he took one slow, helpless step toward her before he caught himself, bewildered, poured in front of the entire court. It lasted a breath. Perhaps no one marked it. Lords wandered. Old men lost the thread. But when Eloin dragged her eyes from the confused old alpha, she found Counselor Sethric already watching her from beside the throne, and he was not confused at all. He was smiling. He inclined his head to her the way one might salute a discovery, and Eloin understood with sick certainty that the thing Halda had spent so long hiding was hidden no longer. The king began, that same week, to dream. She knew before he told her, because the warden knew. The beast had grown so easy in her care that whole nights passed without a stir, but now it woke some hours before dawn, and lifted its head from her lap and turned toward the connecting door, and made a low sound of distress over and over until Eloin followed it to understand. She found the king rigid in his great bed, not thrashing, worse than thrashing, held perfectly still by something with its hand around his throat, his jaw clenched, his eyes moving fast beneath the lids, and cold sweat standing on his brow though the fire was high. She had seen animals dream. She had never seen anything fight a dream the way this man fought his. "Sire," she said, and touched his shoulder, and the birch forest took her. She stood in the cold moonlight again, and this time she was not alone in it. Emrys was ahead of her among the pale trees, and he was not the king here. Here he was stripped of all of it, the crown and the stillness and the long years of holding his face together. And what was left was a man standing at the edge of a frozen mirror, staring at the great silver chain where it ran down into the black water and vanished. And at the far end of the chain, out in the dark under the too large moon, something strained and struggled and did not surface, and the thin, worn woman's voice she had heard the first night was calling, saying the words she still could not understand. "Emrys," Eloin said. He did not turn. He could not seem to move at all, could only stand and watch the chain and the black water, and through the soles of her feet, through the cold, through the strange, bright air of the place, she felt what he felt, the way she had felt what the warden felt, and it was not fear. It was worse than fear. It was a certainty, deep and settled and poisonous, that whatever was drowning out there in the dark was drowning because of him, and that he deserved to stand on this shore and watch it forever. She crossed the snow and took his hand. The place shuddered, the moon flickered. And then she was pulling, the way she had pulled 100 frightened animals back from the edges of things, and the birch forest thinned and went to smoke, and she was on her knees on the king's bed, in the firelit dark, with his hand crushed in both of hers and his eyes open and wild and fixed on her face. For a long moment neither of them moved. His chest heaved. Her heart was going so hard she thought he must feel it through her palms. "You keep following me there," he said hoarsely. "You keep going there," she said. "What is it?" "What is that place?" He looked at her, and she watched him decide, watched the old habit of silence war with something newer and lose. "The old tongue has a name for it," he said. "The Moon Road." where the bound things walk when they sleep. The warden has walked it every night of its long life, because that is what a warden is. A thing that keeps the road, so the rest of us need not. But something on it has hold of the beast now, and will not let go, and when it cannot break free, it drags me there with it, because we are bound it, and I, blood and bone. His hand had turned in hers, without his seeming to notice, his fingers closing around her fingers. And now it drags you. That is why I sent for you, and then wished I had not. I am pulling you onto a road that has been killing me for a year, and I do not know how to stop. I was not stuck, Eloin said both times. I chose to leave, and both times I chose to come back for you. She had not planned to say the last part. It hung there in the dark between them. Emrys went, very still. The firelight moved over the hard planes of his face, and found something under them she had not been permitted to see before. You should be afraid of me, he said quietly. Everyone else has the sense to be. I have never once been afraid of the things everyone else is afraid of, she said. It is one of my more inconvenient qualities. The distance between them had become very small. She knelt on his bed with his hand in hers, the fire low, the great wolf watching from the doorway with its ancient patient eyes, and she felt the pull again, not the moon road this time, but something warmer and far more dangerous. The pull of him, the human heat of him, the ache she had been lying to herself about for 2 weeks. He lifted his free hand. For one suspended breath she thought he would touch her face, and she did not move, did not breathe, wanted it with a fierceness that frightened her. Then he closed his eyes and let the hand fall. Stay within reach, he said, low and rough. And it was not the invitation her foolish heart had leapt toward. If I go back to that road tonight, I want you close enough to pull me out. That is all. That is all this can be. So she lay down that night, not on the couch in the next room, but on the wide bed beside him. A careful arm's length of cold linen between them, close enough to catch his hand if the moon road took him. And she listened to him, not sleeping, and did not sleep herself. And when at last the gray birch forest rose up around her again, she was ready for it. Ready to find him and pull him home. But this time, the moon road showed her something new. This time, out at the far end of the silver chain, the black water stirred, and a shape broke the surface at last, and it was not a beast. It was a woman, pale and drowned and reaching, with snow-white hair and a face Eloin had seen only once in her life, in the still water of the horse trough on a summer morning when she had stopped to push her own hair back. It was her face, older and starved, and full of a grief past bearing, but it was her face. And behind the drowning woman, on the black shore, stood a tall figure in the grey of House Verdane, watching the chain pull taut and doing nothing, exactly as Emrys now stood on his own shore and did nothing. And Eloin understood in a rush of cold horror that whatever had been done on this road, whatever had broken the bond and poisoned the king's sleep and left a woman with her own face to drown in the dark forever, it had been done by his house, and that the king, somewhere behind his silences, already knew. She did not sleep again that night. She lay in the dark beside the sleeping king, with the drowned woman's face burned into the back of her eyes, her own face, older and starved and grieving, and she waited for the gray dawn with a patience that had turned to stone in her chest. When he woke, she was sitting up against the headboard, watching him, and he knew at once that something had changed. He always knew. It was one of the things she had come to hate and love in equal measure. The way this man read a room, the way she read a frightened animal. You saw her, Eloin said. It was not a question. Emrys sat up slowly. The year of not sleeping had come back into his face overnight, as though the road had charged him interest. Saw who? He said. But his voice had no fight in it. The woman in the black water. The one your house left to drown. She heard how steady her own voice was, and marveled at it. She has my face, Emrys. I have looked at that face in every trough and every still bucket in the kennels for as long as I can remember. So, you will not sit in this bed and ask me who. You will tell me why a woman with my face is chained on your moon road, and you will tell me now, because I have spent my whole life being told nothing for my own protection, and I am done. I am done, being protected into the dark. For a long moment he said nothing. Then he got up and crossed to the window and put his back to her, the way he had the night he set the arrangement, and he told her. The warden was never ours, he said. That is the truth. My house has killed to bury. Long ago, it belonged to a line of your kind. Voices. The old guardians. The warden loved them and answered them freely, because a voice does not command a wolf the way a whip commands it. A voice is loved. That is the whole terrible secret of you. The beasts do not obey you because they must. They obey you because they cannot help but adore you. His hands were fists at his sides. My ancestors wanted the power of the warden without the price of being worthy of it, so they took it. They cornered a voice of the old line on the road, where a voice is only a woman, and they chained her to it and they let her drown, and in her drowning the bond tore free of the true line and fastened by force onto the blood that killed her. Onto us, onto me. Aloin's hands had gone cold. The woman with my face. Her name was Marin. He turned his eyes wet and made himself not look away from her. A kind of penance. It was not generations ago. That is the other lie. My father did it. 20 years passed, when I was a boy, old enough to know better, and too afraid to do anything. There was one voice left in the realm, a woman living quiet in a border village, and he hunted her onto the road and drowned her there. And I stood on the shore of the waking world and let him. Her child was never found. Smuggled out, they said, and my father searched for the babe for years, because a living voice is the one thing that can pull the warden back to the true line and unmake everything we stole. He looked at her as though she were a wound. A year ago, my spies found a whisper of a girl in my own kennels that the beasts would follow into fire, and the witches told me the cure was simple: find the hidden voice. End her as we ended the mother. Break her, and the split heels, and the bond holds, and I live. The room had gone very quiet. You refused, Eloin whispered. I chose to die instead. Emmer said simply, I have been choosing it every night for a year. I decided I would rather let the warden take me down onto that road forever than become my father. I did not know your name. I did not know your face. I told myself it was easy to die for a stranger. His voice dropped to nothing. And then the stranger walked into my moon court and put her hand on my dying wolf. And I have not had an easy thought since. Eloin could not breathe. I am the child, she said. I am Marin's child. You have been letting yourself die, rather than kill me. Yes, said the king. And then, his face closed, and the softness went out of it, and she watched him make the exact mistake she had known he would make, because she had come to know the shape of his goodness, and its shape was always, always sacrifice. Which is why you cannot stay, he said. Sethric knows what you are. Half the court suspects. Every night the road pulls you deeper, and it will drown you as it drowned her, and there are men in this fortress who would see you dead for the cure the moment they can reach you. I will not watch it happen twice. You leave tonight. Osric will take you north to a holding, where no one knows your face, and you will live, Eloin. You will live, if I have to break my own heart, to make you do it. And you will die, she said, rising, furious, reaching for him. You will die the moment I am gone. The warden only sleeps for me. Then I will die having done one decent thing. He caught her wrists, gently, and held her away from him, and it was worse than if he had struck her. Go, please. Do not make me order it. You are doing it again, she said, and her voice shook with fury and with love, and she could no longer tell the two apart. You think sending me away is the noble thing, the kind thing. It is not. It is the coward's thing dressed up in a crown. You would rather die a martyr on that road then live and let someone stay close enough to see you frightened. I have spent my life being the person other people sent away for their own good, Emerus. And there is nothing good in it. There is only the cold, and the not being wanted, and the slow certain lesson that you were never worth the trouble of keeping. Something crossed his face then, something that told her the words had landed true. But he had made his decision, and he was a man built entirely out of decisions he could not take back, and he closed his hand around her wrist one last time and said, "I am sorry," and turned away. That night they took her out through the winter gate, the same gate she had been carried in through as a babe in a wolfskin basket, and behind her, from the high stone of the moon court, the warden began to howl, and it did not stop, and the sound of it followed her out into the night, and did not fade for a very long time. Osric drove the horses hard through the night, and into the grey country north of Dunkaro, and Halda rode beside her wrapped in shawls and said nothing, because there was nothing to say, and Eloin sat between them, and felt the thread in her chest stretch thinner with every league until she thought it would snap and take her heart out through her ribs. By the second day she could not eat. By the third she could not stand without the world tilting, and the headaches came. Great crushing things that made her beg for the shutters, and Halda sat by her pallet and wiped her face and murmured the old kennel tunes, and would not meet her eyes. The news came north with the supply riders, and Osric did not try to keep it from her. The warden had not eaten since she left. It had torn one of the moon court's iron rings clean out of the stone and worn itself ragged against the new one. The king had not risen from his bed in 2 days. The healers had stopped pretending, and the whole of Dunkaro had gone quiet, in the way a place goes quiet when it is waiting for a death. "He is dying faster than the beast now," Osric said, low, "because he has stopped fighting it. He has wanted to lay it down for a year, and you were the only reason he did not. I think he sent you away so that he could finally be allowed to stop." Eloin felt how thin the thread in her chest had worn, and knew he was right. "It is the bond," Eloin said, on the third night, when the fever had loosened her tongue. "Is it not the thing between me and him, between me and the beast? It is tearing, because we pulled it too far." Halda was quiet a long time. Then, in the dark, the old woman finally told her the last of it, the piece she had been carrying alone for 20 years. "I was there," Halda said, "the night your mother died. Not on the road. On the shore, in the waking world, in a border village not unlike this one, holding a screaming babe while the king's men did their work in the barrow above us. Marin gave you to me with the water already rising in the road behind her eyes. She said, 'Take her where the beasts are. They will know her. They will keep her secret when no man will. And they have, child. Every wolf that ever gentled to you was keeping her last word. Every hushed kennel boy. Every night I made you swear to be nothing.'" The old woman's hands shook in the dark. She was not afraid at the end. That is the thing I have never forgotten. The road already had its hooks in her, and she was not afraid. Only sorry. Sorry she could not stay to raise you. Sorry she was leaving you a world that would hunt you for the crime of being loved by wolves. She made me promise 2 things. That I would keep you alive, and that I would never let you learn what you were until you were strong enough to survive the knowing. Halda's voice broke. "I have kept the first promise all these years. I am no longer certain I judged the second one rightly." Her voice broke again on the next words. "I hid you in plain sight in the one place the crown would never think, to look for a queen among the muck and the meat barrels, and I told you that you were nothing so many times that you believed it. And that is the sin I will answer for, because you were never nothing, Eloin. You were the most wanted child in the history of this realm. Your mother died on a road between worlds to buy you one more breath. Do not ever again let me hear you say you were thrown away." Loan wept then, for the first time in years, wept for a mother she had never known, and a self she had spent years making small. And the weeping seemed to loosen something, and for the first time in 3 days, her chest eased. And on the road, for the first time, she was not lost. She found the frozen mirror and the silver chain, and she walked out onto the black ice toward the drowning woman, toward Marin, toward her mother, and she was almost there. She could almost see her mother's eyes when hands seized her out of the dream and dragged her back into the waking world. They were not gentle hands. She woke in a strange cold room with her wrists bound, and Counselor Sethric was sitting across from her with a cup of wine and the patient smile of a man whose long wait was finally over. "There she is," he said pleasantly. "The kennel girl. The little queen. Do you know, I have wanted a voice for 20 years, since I was a young man watching the old king squander his on murder. Such a waste. He killed the last one to save a bond. He did not even understand." He sipped his wine. "I am cleverer than the old king. I do not want you dead. I want you useful. There is a right, an old and ugly one, and it can take the bond off a dying beast and its dying king and hang it on a new frame. On me, girl, with you to speak the words that make the warden hold still while we do it. Every wolf in the realm answers a voice, and you are going to make them answer me." "I will never," Eloin said. "You will," Sethric said, unbothered, "because your king is already halfway down that road and dying, and I have men riding to Dunkero tonight to help him along, and the only living thing that can pull him back is bound and sitting in front of me. So here are your choices, little queen. Speak the words at moonrise. Take the bond off him and set it on me, and I let him live in a cell somewhere quiet. Or refuse, and he dies on the road alone, and I take the warden the hard way over both your corpses." He set down the cup. "The moon rises in 3 hours. I am a patient man, but not, I confess, that patient. I would think quickly, if I were you." He rose and gestured toward the far end of the hall, where a hunched figure in gray scratched lines of salt and silver across the flagstones in a slow spiral. "The right is delicate, my witch tells me. A voice must speak, willing, or near enough, that the words carry weight. So, I will not threaten you. I will only remind you that everything you have ever loved lives on the end of a chain I hold. The woman who raised you. The beast that knelt at your door. The fool king who thought sending you into the cold was a kindness." He smiled, and it was almost gentle, which was the worst of it. "I have studied voices my whole life. You cannot help but love. It is the whole of your power and the whole of your weakness, for a creature that cannot help but love can always be made to trade itself away for the things it loves. 3 hours. Choose which of them you will save, since you cannot save them all." Then he left her bound in the cold room with 2 guards at the door, the salt spiral drying on the flagstones and the moon climbing toward the ridge outside the narrow window. They had underestimated her. Everyone always had. It was, she thought, as the last hour before moonrise bled away, the single great advantage of a lifetime spent being nothing. Sethric had bound her wrists and set 2 guards at the door and left her, because what was a slip of a kennel girl going to do? And he had forgotten the one thing that Halda had spent years praying no one would remember. Eloin did not need her hands to command a wolf. She needed only her voice and the terrible adoring pull of what she was. And Sethric, for all his cleverness, had brought her to a border keep full of men. And men of rank in this realm were wolves. And wolves, every last one of them, from the mightiest alpha to the meanest guard, could not help but love her. She began to hum. Low, under her breath, the old rise and fall from the kennels. The tune, the beasts had always leaned toward end. She let it carry everything she was into it. The loneliness, and the fury, and all the years of being small. And she felt it go out through the stone of the keep, and find them, one by one, the wolves under the men's skins. And she felt them turn toward her, like flowers toward a sun. The 2 guards at her door opened it without being told. They cut her bonds with their own knives. They did not know why they were weeping as they did it. She almost stopped then. Halda's warning rose up in her, the drilled and desperate refrain, "Do not let them see. Be small, be nothing. A girl the beasts obey is a key and keys get used. But she understood now what Hulda had never let herself say. A key can be used. A queen chooses. The difference was not in the power, but in whether she picked it up herself or waited, small and frightened, for someone to turn her in a lock. She had spent years being turned in other people's locks. She was finished. She walked out of that room a queen for the first time in her life, and the keep unmade itself around her as she went, hard men falling to their knees, Sethrick's careful plot dissolving into a corridor of bowed heads. And when she came at last into the hall, where the counselor stood, with his blood witch and his ugly right half drawn on the floor, in salt and silver, she did not raise her hand, she raised her voice. "Sethrick," she said, and every wolf in the hall heard the true weight of what she was underneath it. "You spent 20 years wanting a thing you could take. You never once understood that a voice cannot be taken, only loved. And no one has ever loved you, and no one ever will, and your own men can feel it in this room right now." She looked at his guards, at the blood witch, at all of them turned toward her and away from him. "Kneel," she said, softly to the wolves in them. They knelt, all of them, everyone in the hall but Sethrick, who stood alone and white in the center of his ruined right, as the whole world turned its back on him at last. And that was when the doors at the far end blew open, on a gust of cold night air, and the warden came through them like grey death, and behind it, grey-faced and swaying and barely upright, but on his own 2 feet, was the king. He should not have been able to ride. He should not have been able to stand. But the warden had torn free of Duncarrow 2 nights before and run north with the last of its strength, following the bond like a lodestone toward the living voice it would not be parted from again. And the king had gone after it half dead in the saddle rather than let it reach her alone. He had felt the bond flare bright and unbroken the moment she stopped being afraid of what she was, he told her later, and that flare was the only reason he found the strength to cross the last of the distance. And here he was, and here she was, and across the length of that ruined hall, they looked at each other and stopped pretending. She reached him first, or he reached her. Afterward, neither of them could agree. She only knew that his arms came around her hard enough to hurt, and she did not care, that his face was in her hair and hers against his heart, that he was saying her name over and over like a man who had thought he would never get to say it again. "You were supposed to be safe," he said hoarsely. "You were supposed to be far away and safe." "I am done being sent away into the dark," Eloin said against his chest. "I told you that. I am staying, Emrys. I am staying, and you are going to stop dying, and we are going to fix the thing your father broke, the 2 of us, together, because I did not spend my whole life being nothing, just to lose the one person who ever looked at me and saw a queen." "I have no right to you," he said. "You know what my house did to yours. You know what I stood by and let happen. If you have any sense left in you, you will hate me, and I will have earned it." "I have thought about hating you," she admitted. "It would be simpler, but I have been on the other end of a thing blamed for what it was born into, Emrys. I was blamed for being wanted by wolves before I could walk. I will not do to you what the world did to me. You were a frightened boy, and then a man who chose to die rather than repeat the crime. That is the opposite of nothing." She took his face in her hands. "So, I am not going to hate you. I am going to do something far more frightening. I am going to keep you." He drew back enough to look at her. Whatever he saw there undid the last of him. He kissed her. Then, with a year of dying and a lifetime of holding still poured into it, and the bond between them, the old broken thing his house had stolen and forced, shivered and began, quietly to remake itself into something no one had taken, something freely given, something chosen. The warden pressed its great head against them both, and let out a long breath, and for the space of that kiss, the whole grieving realm seemed to hold still and hope. But the road was not closed yet. The drowned woman still waited on the black ice. and they both knew, drawing apart, foreheads together, breathing the same air, that the hardest thing was still ahead of them, and that this time they would have to walk onto the moon road on purpose and finish it. They did it together. That same night, in the cold hall with the warden curled around them, and Helda keeping watch and Osric at the door. They lay down side by side and joined hands, and Elowin hummed them down into sleep, and the birch forest rose up around all three of them at once. The king and the voice, and the great grey wolf, and this time, no one had dragged them there. This time, they had come to end it. The frozen mirror stretched out under the enormous moon, the silver chain ran down into the black water, and out at the far end of it, the drowning woman turned her starved and grieving face toward them. For a moment, none of them moved. The place was heavier than Elowin had ever felt it, thick with a grief gone stagnant and old, and she understood the road had grown strong on exactly that, on sorrow that circled and never resolved, on three creatures each convinced the drowning was their fault alone. The warden believed it had failed its true voice. Emerus believed he had failed a woman. He was too weak to save. And Elowin had spent her whole life believing that if she had only been better, worthier, less trouble, her mother would have found a way to stay. 3 wounds, 1 shape. The road had fed on all 3 for 2 decades, and it did not mean to let go without a fight. "Mother," Elowin said. The word went across the ice like the first crack of a thaw. She walked out onto the black mirror, and Emerus walked with her, and the warden paced at her side, and with every step, she felt the old story pressing in, the story that had drowned this place since before she was born. The story that said a voice belonged at the bottom of the dark, and a Vardane belonged on the shore, doing nothing, and a warden belonged chained forever between them, grieving, guilty, unable to save anyone. It was Emerus's guilt, and the warden's guilt, and her own oldest wound braided into one freezing certainty that this was what they deserved. The moon leaned closer, cold and enormous, and a voice that was not any of theirs, and was somehow all of theirs, whispered up through the black water, "You should have done more. You should have been more. This blood is on your hands." She felt Emerus falter, felt the warden's head begin to droop, felt the terrible pull of agreement, the awful comfort of believing you deserve your suffering because at least then it means something. "No," Elowin said aloud, "to the ice, to the moon, to all of it. We are done deserving this." She knelt at the edge of the black water and looked into her mother's drowned eyes, and she did not try to pull her out, because she understood at last that Maren was not trapped by the chain. Maren was trapped by grief, by the belief her death had been for nothing, by a lifetime of her only child living small and hidden and calling herself unwanted. "You did not die for nothing," Elowin told her, weeping. "I lived. Do you hear me? I lived, and I was loved. The beasts loved me, and Helda loved me, and this stubborn, dying man loves me. And I am not small anymore, and I am not hidden, and I am not thrown away. You bought me my whole life with yours, and I am going to spend it. Mother, I promise you, I am going to spend every day of it. You can rest now, you can let it go." And beside her, Emrys sank to his knees on the black ice and spoke to the ghost of the woman his father had murdered, the woman he had been a coward too young and too frightened to save. "I am not him," the king said, and his voice broke the silence like a bell. "I stood on the shore once and did nothing, and I have hated myself for it every night for 20 years, and I told myself the hating was the least I owed you. But hating myself never bought you a single breath, so I am going to do the thing I should have done. Then, I am giving it back. The bond, the warden, the crown, my house built on your bones. I am giving it back to your line, to your daughter, freely, the way it should always have been. Not because I am forced, because it is yours." He bowed his head. "Forgive me, or do not, but be free." The warden stepped forward. Then the great, grieving guardian that had been forced to watch its true voice drown, and had never once been allowed to mourn her, and it lowered its huge gray head to the black water, and it keened, one long terrible note of a sorrow beyond any measure. And Eloin put her arms around its neck, and Emrys put his hand on its scarred flank, and the three of them grieved together for the woman in the water, freely, at last. It was not a quiet grief. It was the kind damned too long, that breaks all at once, and it shook the frozen mere, and rang off the pale trees, and poured out of all three of them, until there was nothing left to hold. Eloin wept for the mother she would never remember, and for the girl who had mucked out pens and called herself lucky to be tolerated. Emrys wept for the boy too, afraid of his father to be brave, and for the years he had spent punishing that boy instead of forgiving him. And the warden grieved the only way a wolf can, with its whole body pressed between the two it had chosen, its true voice restored to it at last after a lifetime in chains. The road drank none of it. For the first time, the sorrow had somewhere to go besides back down into the black water. And Marin smiled. The chain dissolved. Not with violence, not with a snapping of links, but the way ice goes to water in the spring, quietly, all at once, releasing. The black mirror brightened. The drowning woman rose, but she rose light now, unburdened, and she touched her daughter's face with a hand like cold moonlight. And she looked at the king with something that was not forgiveness and was not condemnation. And then she turned and walked out across the mere, toward the great moon, and the birch forest filled slowly with a pale gold light that Eloin had never seen there, and the woman with her face grew smaller and smaller and was gone. The moon road closed behind her like a healed wound. Eloin woke with the dawn coming gray through the shutters, and the warden breathing slow and deep and peaceful against her back, and Emrys beside her with his eyes open. And for the first time since she had met him, there was nothing behind them but mourning. "It let me go," he whispered, wondering. "The road, it let me go." "We let each other go," she said, and took his hand and held on. The curse, if that was even the right word for it, did not lift all at once, because nothing worth mending ever does. The warden slept, truly slept, for a fortnight after the moon road closed, and when it woke it was not quite the terror it had been, though it kept its size and its scars and its habit of laying dead birds proudly at Eloin's feet. Temrys slept too, though some nights old grief still woke him, and on those nights he did not hold it behind his teeth the way he once had. He talked, she listened. That was the whole of the medicine, and it was enough. The court did not know what to do with any of it. A kennel girl, who was also the last true voice, a hidden queen, raised among the meat barrels, wed to the king whose own father had murdered her mother. There was no precedent in all the dusty rolls of House Bardane, and the highborn whispered behind their hands for a long while. And Eloin found she did not much care. She had spent too long being nothing to people like that. She had no intention of spending one more hour asking their permission to exist. Sethric was given to the border, stripped and quiet, to a keep far from any wolf that might remember his name, which was a gentler end than he had planned for either of them, and which was, Emrys said, exactly why they could afford to give it. And on the morning she is thinking of now, months later, Eloin woke slowly to pale light, and the weight of a king's arm across her waist, and the greater weight of an ancient wolf sprawled shamelessly across both their feet, snoring, taking up 2/3 of a bed built for royalty and clearly considering it his by right. She lay still and did not wake them. She thought about a basket lined with wolfskin, left at a winter gate by a woman who loved her enough to die on a road between worlds. She thought about every beast that had ever leaned into her hand, keeping a secret, keeping her, for 20 patient years. She thought that she had spent her whole life believing she belonged to no one, and had been wrong about the one thing she had been most certain of, which was a fine thing to be wrong about. Then, the warden opened one silver eye and thumped its great tail once against the coverlet, and Elowen smiled at the creature that had knelt at her door and changed everything, and settled back into the warmth of the two she loved, and slept.